In a Snowbound, North Dakota grain station, Sergeant Tobin Ashford found a starving German shepherd giving birth behind a concrete wall. He thought he was only saving Ruth and her 5 newborn puppies from the cold. Then an old tin box surfaced from the wall, carrying letters from the father he believed had abandoned him. But the truth inside those letters was not clean enough to heal him easily. It pointed to a grain system that had quietly hurt small farmers for years, while good people kept silent to survive. Now Tobin had to choose between protecting his father's memory and telling the truth his town could no longer avoid. Share your own moving story about an animal you love, and please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Morning came bright enough to hurt. The blizzard had passed some time before dawn, leaving Red Willow County beneath a sky of polished blue and a silence so complete that Sergeant Tobin Ashford could hear snow slipping from the roof of the old control house in soft, heavy folds. Prairie Crown Annex stood beyond his kitchen window. 4 weathered grain silos, a narrow loading tower, and a line of rusted conveyor housings rising above the white fields. The facility had not stored grain in years, but the cooperative still owned the land, and Tobin's low-rent caretaker agreement required him to inspect storm damage, keep trespassers out, and report anything that could become a liability. It was a suitable arrangement for a man who preferred machinery to conversation. At 46, Tobin remained tall and lean, though the injury along his lower spine had taught his body a private vocabulary of hesitation. On cold mornings, his left leg sometimes followed the rest of him half a beat late. He had learned to disguise the delay by turning it into patience. His ash-brown hair was still damp from the shower when the county dispatcher called. "Possible animal trapped at Prairie Crown Annex," she said. Caller heard scratching and some kind of whining from the rear maintenance building. Tobin looked through the window toward the silent structures. "Who called?" "Snowplow operator. Didn't enter the property. I'm already here." He pulled on a gray thermal shirt, his slate blue uniform, and a winter patrol coat. A faded brick-red neck warmer, one of the last things his mother had knitted before arthritis took the strength from her hands, disappeared beneath the raised collar. He clipped on his duty belt, tested the radio microphone at his shoulder, and stepped outside. The cold met him without wind, clean and absolute. Snow reached halfway up his boots where it had drifted between the control house and the maintenance wing. His black watch marked 7:18. The orange second hand moved with irritating confidence. Tobin followed a shallow line in the snow near the wall. Not paw prints, exactly. The storm had softened their edges, but something had passed through before the final layer fell. At the rear door he heard it, a rough scrape. Then a low, strained sound from inside. Tobin rested one gloved hand near the doorframe and listened again. The building's power had been disconnected years earlier. No fans, no belts, no reason for anything to move. He unlocked the door and pushed it inward 3 inches. A growl rolled from the darkness. It was not loud. That made it more serious. Tobin stopped. "Easy," he said. His voice sounded strange inside the empty building, flattened by concrete and old metal. He opened the door just enough for daylight to enter. Dust hung in the beam. The maintenance room was separated from the grain bins by thick walls and a sealed service corridor. Old sacks had been dragged into the far corner near an abandoned dryer pipe. A German shepherd lay among them. She was nearly black across the head and back, with dark wheat-colored fur along her chest and legs. Snow had dried in ridges along her coat. One ear stood upright, the tip of the other folded slightly outward. Beneath her throat a pale crescent of fur caught the light. Her ribs showed. Her amber-brown eyes did not leave Tobin. She shifted, and he saw the swollen curve of her abdomen. The growl came again, followed by a tightening through her body that made her paws press into the sacks. Tobin understood. "All right," he murmured. "You picked a difficult address." The dog showed no interest in humor. Tobin removed his hat. Then, slowly, he unclipped his duty belt and placed it outside the doorway. The firearm remained secured in its holster, but the heavy shape and unfamiliar smell did not belong near an animal already deciding whether he was dangerous. He crouched, careful of his back, and turned his body slightly sideways. The shepherd's eyes tracked every movement. Tobin slid a shallow metal bowl across the floor. He had filled it from the control house before entering. The bull stopped several feet short of the nest. The dog did not drink. Another contraction passed through her. Her head lowered, and for a moment the growl broke into a thin sound of exhaustion. Tobin reached for his radio. Dispatch. Contact Dr. Linnea Broder. Tell her I have a pregnant German Shepherd in active labor at Prairie Crown Annex. The animal is conscious, defensive, and severely underweight. He looked at the old dryer pipe, the sacks, and the frost forming around the inside edge of the door. And tell her the room is losing heat. While he waited, Tobin dragged 2 unused insulation panels across the floor, never moving directly toward the dog. He placed them against the worst gaps in the wall. Then he carried in a portable heater from the control house, positioning it far enough away that the dog could not reach the cord. The shepherd watched him work. That Tobin understood. Work made sense. Work allowed a person to remain useful without explaining anything. 20 minutes later, the first puppy arrived. Tobin did not see the exact moment. He heard a new sound beneath the mother's breathing, small and wet and uncertain. The shepherd bent toward it immediately. Tobin stayed where he was. Something inside him wanted to move closer, to check, to correct, to make certain. He forced his hands to remain open on his knees. The mother cleaned the puppy, nudged it toward warmth, then raised her head and stared at him again. Not permission, a warning renewed. I'm staying here, Tobin said. The puppy found its mother. The room changed around that tiny movement. It was still cold. The walls were still stained, and the cooperative still owned every board and bolt. Yet the place no longer felt abandoned. There were now 2 heartbeats behind the concrete wall. By the time tires crunched outside, a second puppy had been born. Dr. Linnea Broder entered carrying a canvas medical bag and wearing a dark brick-red parka over insulated work clothes. She was 42, with wind-reddened cheeks, clear green eyes, and dark blonde hair braided low beneath a wool cap. She did not rush toward the nest. Instead, she stopped beside Tobin. How close have you been? This close. Has she tried to lunge? No. Good. Defensive is not the same as aggressive. Linnea lowered herself carefully, letting the shepherd study her. She has done most of the important work already. The dog's breathing changed. Another contraction. Linnea watched the abdomen and checked the time. The roads south are still half blocked, she said quietly. Transporting her now could be worse than leaving her here. We stabilize the room and intervene only if she needs us. Tobin nodded. Linnea glanced at the heater, the insulation panels, and the bowl of untouched water. You built a field clinic in 20 minutes. It's a heater and 2 pieces of foam. That is how most field clinics begin. The third puppy arrived without difficulty. Linnea guided Tobin through replacing a soaked sack near the edge of the nest, while the mother remained focused on the newborn. He moved slowly, never reaching over her body. The shepherd's growl returned once. Tobin froze. Linnea spoke without looking at him. She is telling you where the line is. I noticed. Then respect it. He withdrew 6 inches. The growl stopped. Near midday, the 4th puppy came. It was smaller than the others and lay still where it had been delivered. The mother nudged it once. Then again, no sound followed. Tobin felt the room narrow. For an instant, the concrete wall became the gray interior of a transport aircraft. He remembered the vibration beneath his knees, the taste of metal at the back of his throat, and a medic telling him not to close his eyes while someone pressed both hands against his side. He remembered another pair of hands slipping from his grip years later, while rotor noise gathered somewhere beyond a ridge. Linnea's voice reached him through the memory. "Tobin!" He looked at her. "I need your hands." The shepherd was exhausted. She continued cleaning the puppy, but the tiny chest did not rise. Linnea moved close enough to lift it, then stopped as the mother stiffened. "She is allowing you nearer than me," Linnea said. "Move slowly. Let her see everything." Tobin approached on his knees. The pain in his back sharpened, but it belonged to the present, and for once he was grateful for it. He extended both hands. The shepherd's lips tightened. Her amber eyes held his. "I'm not taking it away," Tobin whispered. He lifted the puppy only a few inches from the nest. It weighed almost nothing. Linnea instructed him to clear the mouth and nose, then showed him how to rub the small body with a dry towel and stimulate the chest without using force. Tobin obeyed each direction exactly. Nothing happened. The old panic tried to rise, not as fear but as certainty. Too late, again. His hands had held that certainty before. "Tobin," Linnea said, "stay with what is here." He looked down, black fur, wet ears, a narrow chest beneath his thumb. Not the past, not a battlefield. "A puppy in a cold room in North Dakota," he continued. The tiny body moved. At first, Tobin thought it was only the pressure of the towel. Then the puppy opened its mouth and released a sound so faint it could have been mistaken for the squeak of an old hinge. The shepherd lifted her head. The puppy cried again, louder this time. Air entered Tobin's lungs all at once. He lowered the newborn beside its mother. She sniffed it thoroughly, then pulled it against her belly with her nose. Her eyes returned to Tobin. The warning remained, but something else had entered it. Not gratitude. Tobin did not need to invent human meaning for an animal. Recognition was enough. The fifth puppy arrived nearly 40 minutes later, strong and noisy. When Linnea finally examined the mother from a safe angle, the shepherd was exhausted but stable. There was no sign of another puppy or an immediate need for surgery. Linnea placed a water bowl nearer the nest. This time, the dog drank. "She is dehydrated and badly underfed," Linnea said, "but her temperature is acceptable. We watch for infection, reduced milk, continued straining, or unusual weakness." She ran a scanner along the dog's shoulders and neck. No signal. The worn patch around the shepherd's throat suggested an old collar. Calluses on her paws indicated hard ground rather than a life indoors. "She belonged somewhere once," Tobin said. "Most dogs do. Doesn't mean the place deserved her." "No," Linnea replied. "It also doesn't mean we know what happened." Tobin looked at the mother curled around 5 puppies. 6 bodies rose and fell within the nest. He had begun the morning expecting a damaged door, a trapped raccoon, perhaps a frozen pipe. Instead, 6 heartbeats now depended on the temperature of a room no one had cared about yesterday. The name came to him without planning. Ruth. Linnea looked over. The dog? A nurse who helped keep me alive after I was injured. She had a way of making instructions sound non-negotiable. Useful quality. The shepherd opened one eye at the sound of the name but did not move. "Temporary," Tobin said. "Names usually are, until they aren't." Deacon Sorensen arrived shortly after 3. The cooperative manager crossed the snow in a clean camel-colored work coat and polished honey-brown boots. At 55, Deacon carried a solid frame and the unhurried confidence of a man accustomed to being heard without raising his voice. His silver-blonde hair remained perfectly combed despite the cold. He stood at the doorway and observed the room without entering. "I am told we now have a litter of dogs in an insured agricultural facility. We have a medical emergency in a detached maintenance room," Tobin said. Deacon's pale eyes moved to Linnea. "Can they be transported?" "Not safely today," she replied. "Possibly not for several days." Deacon nodded as though she had confirmed a figure in a report. "Tobin, your caretaker agreement prohibits keeping animals on cooperative property. This building is not licensed as a shelter, and the board's insurance carrier will not admire the distinction between temporary compassion and permanent liability." Tobin's jaw tightened. Deacon noticed. He noticed most things. "I am not asking anyone to place newborn animals in the snow," Deacon continued. "You have 7 days to arrange legal placement or approve temporary care. Contact county animal control. Document the veterinary findings. Do not represent this as a sheriff's office seizure, and do not use your position to claim property that is not yours." 7 days, Tobin repeated. 7. Deacon looked once more at Ruth. His expression did not soften, but neither did it carry cruelty. "That is more time than the contract requires." Then he left. By evening, Linnea had contacted county animal control and secured provisional permission for emergency care while the roads reopened. They photographed Ruth, documented her condition, and distributed a found animal notice through the sheriff's office, veterinary clinics, and nearby farm networks. No one called before dark. Linnea departed after making Tobin promise to check Ruth's temperature, offer small meals, and contact her if any puppies stopped nursing. "You should sleep," she added. "I'll be here." That was not the same sentence. After she left, the maintenance room settled into the deep quiet of winter. Tobin placed a wooden chair near the door, outside the boundary Ruth had established. He set the water bowl within reach and kept his hands to himself. For nearly an hour, The shepherd watched him. Then, without taking her eyes from his face, Ruth lowered her head and drank. Tobin leaned back. The orange second hand of his watch moved beneath the fluorescent lantern. He intended to remain awake until midnight. Instead, his eyes closed. When morning light finally touched the concrete floor, Tobin woke with his neck stiff and his left foot numb. His first instinct was to check the door. The impulse came and passed. The lock remained where it had been. Across the room, Ruth slept curled around 5 small bodies, her folded ear angled toward him. For the first time in weeks, Tobin could not remember waking during the night. By the third morning, Tobin Ashford had turned the rear maintenance room into something that looked less like a forgotten piece of Prairie Crown Annex and more like a place where living things had a fair chance. He did not call it a shelter. The word felt too large, too hopeful, and too close to a promise he had not been authorized to make. He called it the warm room in his notes. At 5:40 a.m., the room temperature was 69 degrees near Ruth's nest and 64 by the door. The backup heater had cycled properly twice during the night. The generator held steady. The 5 puppies had gained a combined 13 ounces since Linnea Broder's last visit, though the smallest one still needed watching. Tobin wrote every number in a canvas-covered notebook the color of winter wheat. Ruth lay curled against her litter, her dark body forming a wall around them. She no longer growled when Tobin entered, but she still lifted her head and watched his hands until he finished whatever task he had come to do. The pale crescent under her throat showed whenever she checked the doorway. "That dog is running a stricter security operation than the county courthouse," Linnea said from behind him. Tobin glanced over his shoulder. The veterinarian stood in the doorway wearing her brick-red parka, snow caught in the seams, a canvas medical bag hanging from one hand. She had arrived without making noise, which Tobin found both impressive and irritating. "She has standards," he said. "She has newborns. Same thing." Linnea stepped inside and looked at the thermometer, the insulated panels, the clean towels stacked on an overturned crate, and the handwritten feeding schedule taped to the wall. "You made a chart. I made 3. "Of course you did." Tobin capped his pen. The nearest rescue said no. They said not yet. Linnea crouched several feet from Ruth and let the dog smell her glove before moving closer. "They're full after that breeder case in Ramsey County. Even if they had room, I wouldn't move Ruth today unless I had to. The roads are better, but she is still weak." Tobin looked at the puppies. "They stay here then, for now. For now is doing a lot of work." "So are you," Linnea said. "That is part of my concern." He gave her a flat look. She ignored it. "Precision is useful. Warmth is useful. Records are useful. But you cannot schedule your way around sleep. There are 6 animals in a building that was not meant to hold one. And those 6 animals cannot depend on a man who turns himself into equipment." The sentence landed harder than he wanted it to. Tobin turned toward the old dryer pipe and checked a seam he had already checked twice. "I'm fine." Most people who are fine do not say it like a warning. Before he could answer, tires crunched outside. A county animal control truck rolled into the yard, Yellow County lettering dulled by salt and snow. The woman who stepped out was small, quick, and wrapped in a mustard-colored winter jacket, with a white clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Dark hair was pinned low under her cap, and a metal keychain shaped like a paw swung from her belt. Maribel Knox entered like someone who had spent years walking into rooms where both people and animals expected trouble. "You Ashford?" she asked. "Tobin, Maribel Knox, County Animal Control. Dr. Broder says you've got a mother dog, 5 newborns, no chip, no tag, no owner, and a cooperative manager with a calendar. That summarizes the paperwork." "Good. I like paperwork when it keeps everybody honest." Ruth lifted her head. Maribel stopped where she was. Her voice dropped, not softer exactly, but lower and less direct. "Hello, Mama. Nobody needs your babies today." Ruth watched her, then set her chin back beside the smallest puppy. Maribel looked pleased. "She's thinking about believing me. I'll take that." She examined the room without touching anything, took photographs, logged Linnea's medical findings, and filled out a temporary emergency care form on the crate that served as a desk. "This does not make you the owner," she told Tobin. "I know. I mean it. People get attached fast when they save something. Attachment is not legal transfer. I said I know. And wanting to keep them safe is not the same as being able to keep them all. That time Tobin did not answer. Maribel looked up from the form. I'm not accusing you. I'm saving you from a future argument. Linnea's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Tobin signed where Maribel pointed. The arrangement was temporary. Ruth and the puppies would remain in the maintenance room under veterinary supervision until transportation was safe or an approved placement became available. Found animal notices would be distributed through the sheriff's office, the county page, nearby veterinary clinics, and the farm network. If an owner appeared, the county would verify the claim. If no one came forward after the required period, placement could be discussed, not assumed. Maribel underlined that word with the end of her pen. After they left, Tobin returned to the work he understood best. Wind had found a seam behind the old electrical cabinet. He could feel it with the back of his hand, a thin blade of cold slipping through rotten insulation. He brought in a pry bar and loosened the first panel. The wood resisted, then gave with a dry crack. Behind it was not open wall. It was a narrow cavity. Tobin aimed his flashlight inside and saw something wrapped in dark oilcloth, wedged above a rusted conduit box. At first he thought it might be an old parts kit. Then he saw the wax sealing the folded edges. He set down the pry bar. Ruth raised her head. The room seemed to hold its breath with her. Tobin worked the bundle free slowly. Dust flaked from the oilcloth. Beneath it sat a tin box, long and flat, with corrosion blooming across one corner and a strip of old tape around the lid. The box had been hidden well enough that no casual repair would find it, but not well enough to survive a building being torn apart. He carried it to the crate and waited a moment before opening it. That pause bothered him. It felt too much like standing outside a room where bad news had already arrived. Inside were papers. Not money, not a deed, not anything simple enough to understand at first glance. Letters tied with cotton string. Carbon copies, their blue words faded but still readable. Postal receipts, money order stubs, grain weight tickets, moisture reports. A small notebook filled with columns of numbers and hand-drawn marks, circles, slashes, arrows, and short lines grouped beside dates. Tobin touched nothing for several seconds. Then he saw his own name. Tobin, I do not know if you will ever read this. Maybe it is better if you do not. A boy should not have to carry the shape of his father's cowardice, but I have already made you carry the absence of it. The handwriting was narrow, careful, and unfamiliar. The signature at the bottom was not Tobin Ashford. Tobin sat down before he decided to. The chair creaked beneath him. He had not seen his father's name written by his father in more than 30 years. In his memory, Tobin Ashford existed in fragments. The smell of cheap whiskey on a winter coat, a hand gripping a doorframe, his mother standing very still at the kitchen sink, and a truck pulling away before sunrise. The family version had been simple because simple things were easier to survive. Reuben left. Reuben drank. Reuben died somewhere else. But the box did not respect simple things. One receipt showed a money order sent to a post office box in the town where Tobin's mother had lived after the divorce. The sender line held only initials and the name of a church relief fund. Another receipt matched the same pattern. Then another. Tobin's pulse did not quicken. That would have been too honest. Instead, everything inside him became neat and cold. He sorted the papers by type, letters, receipts, grain tickets, ledger pages. He wrote down the condition of the box because that was what evidence deserved, and because evidence was easier to look at than a dead man's apology. Outside, a truck slowed. An old blue farm pickup came into the yard carrying 2 bales of clean straw in the bed. Orrin Bjerk climbed out carefully, one gloved hand gripping a cane made from polished ash wood. He was tall but bent by age with a long weathered face, white brows and a red wool cap pulled low over thin hair. He had promised Linnea he would bring bedding. Tobin met him at the door. Orrin smiled at first. Thought the mother might like something better than old sacks. Then his eyes moved past Tobin to the open tin box. The smile left him so completely that Tobin knew before the old farmer spoke. "You've seen this before," Tobin said. Orrin's hand tightened around the cane. No, that was too fast. The wind moved loose snow across the yard. Somewhere inside the room, one of the puppies made a small complaining sound. Orrin removed his cap slowly. "I know the writing." Tobin waited. The old man looked at the papers as if they might stand up and accuse him by name. "Rubens, you knew my father worked here." "Yes." "You knew when you told Deacon I'd be good for the caretaker place." Orrin closed his eyes once. Tobin stepped closer. "You placed me here. I recommended you. You placed me here." Orrin did not deny it. Tobin felt something sharp move through the calm he had built around himself. "Why? Because I owed him," Orrin said. "And I owed you, and I was too much of a coward to say either thing in plain English." Ruth stirred at the change in Tobin's voice. She did not rise, but her eyes opened. Tobin noticed. That angered him more, somehow. That even now the dog had sense enough to monitor what he tried to hide. He lowered his voice. "You have 5 minutes to tell me what you know." Orrin looked toward the nest. "Not in front of her. She doesn't care about grain tickets. She cares about threat." That answer stopped Tobin long enough for his breathing to even out. They stepped outside into the bright cold. Orrin leaned against the pickup and stared across the fields, where the snow had buried every fence line except the black tips of posts. "Your father was not what people said," Orrin began. "But he was not what those letters will make you want him to be either." Tobin said nothing. He worked night management here after he got sober, kept quiet, sent money when he could. Wouldn't go back because he said your mother deserved peace more than explanations. That sounds convenient. It was. Some truths are still convenient when they're true. Tobin's jaw tightened. Orrin swallowed. There were records, grain adjustments, emergency help for farms that were about to go under. Reuben believed it was temporary, a little bending until the banks eased off. And then bending became business. Orrin would not say more. Not yet. Shame had a way of protecting itself even after decades of rehearsal. "You brought me here because you wanted me to find this. I did not know where he hid it. But you hoped." Orrin looked at him then, his pale eyes wet from the cold or from something he had earned. "I hoped I would become brave before you did." Tobin almost laughed. There was no humor in it. Inside, Ruth gave one short warning sound, as if the room had decided the conversation outside had gone on long enough. By late afternoon, Tobin was at the sheriff's office with the tin box sealed in an evidence bag. He had considered keeping it long enough to read every letter. That was why he did not. Sheriff Ansel Dwyer received the box in the small conference room beside dispatch. Ansel was 58, compact and solid, with close-cut gray hair, a square face, and the steady manner of a man who had learned that raising his voice rarely improved the truth. A black fountain pen rested perfectly straight in his shirt pocket. He listened without interrupting as Tobin explained where the box had been found. When Tobin finished, Ansel capped his pen. "Your father's name is in this?" "Yes." "And the cooperative is involved?" "Possibly." "Then you are not investigating it. I brought it to you." "I know. I'm saying the next part before you make it harder." Tobin looked away. Ansel's voice stayed even. "This protects the case. It also protects you. I've heard that sentence from systems before. This one has my name on it." Before Tobin could answer, the dispatcher knocked and opened the door. "Sheriff, 3 producers are out front asking to file complaints against Prairie Crown." The farmers were not dramatic men. They did not come in shouting. They stood in the lobby with caps in their hands and printed sheets folded into coat pockets. One was barely 30 and looked embarrassed to need help. Another had the hollow-eyed exhaustion of a man doing math every night at a kitchen table. The third, a woman in a green farm jacket, did most of the talking because anger had burned through her hesitation first. Their complaint was specific. Prairie Crown had graded their wheat high for moisture and low for quality. A facility across the county line had tested samples from the same loads and produced numbers that did not match. The difference was not enough to sound impossible. It was just enough to cost a small farm money it could not spare. Tobin stood near the doorway while Ansel took statements. He should have stepped out. He did not. The woman unfolded one of the Prairie Crown tickets and laid it on the desk. Near the bottom, beside the moisture adjustment, were 3 small marks, a circle, a slash, 2 short bars. Tobin felt the past and present meet without permission. Those marks were in Reuben's notebook. Ansel saw his face. "Tobin," the sheriff said, "I'm not touching the case." "Good." Tobin went back to the conference room, wrote a supplemental statement, and signed the chain of custody form for the tin box. Then he left the sheriff's office before anyone could ask whether he was all right. The drive back to Prairie Crown Annex took 14 minutes. He parked by the control house and sat with both hands on the wheel. The field outside shone clean and white, innocent in the way snow could make anything look innocent if it fell deep enough. Inside the maintenance room, Ruth lifted her head when he entered. The puppies shifted blindly against her side. Tobin stayed near the door. He did not touch the nest. He did not open the notebook again. He did not read the rest of the letters hidden in a father's hand. For the first time, the secret behind the concrete wall was no longer his alone. It belonged to every farmer who had folded a bad grain ticket into a coat pocket and wondered why the numbers always seemed to lean against the smaller man. Ruth watched him across the warm room. After a while, she lowered her head and let the puppies feed. Tobin sat down outside her boundary and listened to 6 small breaths continue in the dark. Sheriff Ansel Dwyer did not raise his voice when he told Tobin Ashford to step back. That made it worse. Raised voices could be resisted. Anger could be answered with anger, or silence, or the hard discipline of a man who had survived worse weather than another person's temper. But Ansel spoke from behind his desk with the calm weight of a door being closed properly. "You are not part of the financial investigation," he said. Tobin stood across from him in the sheriff's office, the snow-bright morning pressing through the blinds. The tin box was already logged, photographed, sealed, and locked in the evidence cabinet. The farmer's grain tickets lay in a separate folder on Ansel's desk. "I found the box on property I'm assigned to watch, and you reported it. The marks on those tickets match the notebook, and you noticed that." Tobin's jaw tightened beneath the short line of his mustache. "You're making it sound like I'm done being useful." "No," Ansel said. "I'm making sure useful doesn't become careless." The sheriff capped his black fountain pen and set it exactly parallel to the folder. He was a compact man, built like an old fence post that had taken every winter personally and remained standing anyway. His gray hair was cut close, his khaki shirt neat, his silver star dull rather than polished. Ansel did not perform authority. He simply occupied it. "Your father's name is in that box," Ansel continued. "That gives any defense attorney a clean shot at the case if you handle interviews, search requests, or evidence collection. You can provide statements. You can answer questions about the building. You can assist with safety if I ask. But you do not question Prairie Crown staff. You do not gather records. You do not go looking for explanations." Tobin looked toward the blinds. Outside, a deputy scraped ice from a cruiser windshield. The sound was small and regular, almost comforting. "I've heard systems explain why they can't help," he said. "This sounds familiar." Ansel did not flinch. "This system is not denying your injury claim, Tobin. This one is trying not to ruin the first real lead those farmers may have had in years." That landed where Tobin could not easily move around it. The sentence did not excuse the closed door. It named what stood behind it. Ansel slid a single sheet across the desk. "Write down everything you remember about finding the box. Then go check on your dogs. They're not my dogs. Good. Keep remembering that before Maribel has to say it again." By noon, Ansel had called in someone who spoke the language of grain tickets without needing anyone to translate shame into numbers. Priya Desai arrived from Bismarck in a Navy State vehicle, dusted white with road salt. She carried a cobalt blue case and walked into the sheriff's office as if she had already read the room and found it incomplete. She was in her early 40s, slender, with warm brown skin, a sharp bob of black hair, and a clean streak of silver at her left temple. Her black square glasses gave her face a severity that softened only when she listened. She did not ask to see the letters first. "Personal writings can explain motive," she said, opening her case on the conference table. "They do not prove a pricing scheme. I need weather data, moisture testing records, scale calibration logs, warehouse receipts, settlement sheets, and samples from an outside facility if anyone preserved them." One of the younger deputies blinked. Priya looked at him. "A thief tells a story. A system leaves habits." Tobin stood in the doorway because Ansel had not told him to leave and had not invited him in. That boundary irritated him with its precision. Priya noticed him. "Sergeant Ashford? Yes. You found the historical materials. I found a box. Then my request is simple. Do not help me. Tobin almost smiled despite himself. That is the clearest order I've had all day. It is not personal. It usually isn't. Priya paused over the first grain ticket. It is always personal to the person who has to obey it. For a moment, the room changed. Not dramatically. No revelation. No forgiveness. Just a woman with a stack of forms acknowledging that procedure could still bruise when it was necessary. Tobin left before he said something that would make staying easier. He drove back to Prairie Crown Annex under a wide winter sky. The fields were flat and bright, their fence lines softened beneath snow, the old silos rising like pale sentries above the yard. The warm room smelled of clean towels, puppy milk, old concrete, and the faint metallic breath of the portable heater. Ruth lifted her head when he entered. "Still here," he said. Her eyes followed him to the thermometer, then to the water bowl. She had begun to tolerate his routines the way a wary person tolerated a neighbor who shoveled the walk without making conversation. He was replacing the bedding near the door when Orrin Bjerke's pickup returned. The old farmer came inside slowly, carrying no straw this time. His red wool cap was tucked in one hand. Without it, his white hair looked thin and windblown, and the age in his face showed less as weakness than as long exposure to things he had chosen not to say. "I owe you more than yesterday," Orrin said. Tobin did not look up. "You owed me that before yesterday." "Yes." Ruth's ears shifted. Tobin set down the clean towel and stood, keeping his voice low. "Then say it where she doesn't think you're a threat." They walked into the loading bay, where sunlight cut through gaps in the siding and laid bright bars across the dusty floor. Orrin leaned both hands on his ash cane. "The drought year was 2002, he began. Wheat came in light. Banks were nervous. Fuel prices climbed. 3 farms went under before July. More were headed the same way. Reuben was working here then, night manager. Sober by then. Quiet. Kept a thermos by the scale desk and read old repair manuals when the trucks stopped coming. The image struck Tobin with unreasonable force. He had spent his life remembering a father at doorways, never at desks, never sober under fluorescent lights, never doing a job well enough for another man to remember the thermos. Orrin continued. There was an emergency account at first, nothing formal. Larger producers agreed to delay a portion of settlement. That money helped smaller farms make bank payments or buy seed. Reuben kept notes because he believed any debt, even a mercy debt, ought to have a record. Illegal. Orrin closed his eyes. Wrongly documented. That is not the same as legal. No. The answer was plain enough to hurt. Deacon was assistant finance manager, Orrin said. Young, sharp, always saying the rest of us loved the idea of community because we didn't understand balance sheets. At first, he helped move money where it was supposed to go. Then he changed what supposed to meant. The scheme had not begun as a black door in a dark room. It had begun with coffee at midnight and farmers signing papers with cracked hands, grateful that someone had found a way to bend before the bank broke them. That made it more dangerous, not less. Orrin described the slow turning of it. Moisture readings on small farms began drifting higher than outside tests. Weight deductions became harder to challenge. Storage fees appeared after conversations that no one had recorded. Grain from struggling producers was marked down, dried, blended, and sold at a better grade. A transportation company connected to Deacon's family began appearing on settlement sheets. Reuben signed some of those early tickets, Orrin said. He believed the adjustments were temporary. Then he saw the same farmers being charged again and again. Why didn't he report it? Orrin's mouth trembled once before he pressed it flat. Because Deacon told him every farm that had received help through the side account could be pulled into it. Mine included. Reuben would lose his job, maybe face charges. The families he thought he saved might be named in court. He had already failed your mother and you. He didn't think he had the right to ruin anyone else. Tobin stared at the open bay door. Snow glittered outside, too clean for the conversation. That makes him afraid, Tobin said. Not noble. Orrin nodded. Yes. And you? I told him to wait. For how long? Orrin gripped the cane. Long enough that waiting became the choice. The anger Tobin felt then was different from the anger of finding the box. It was colder and less useful. There was no single place to put it. Reuben had done wrong. Deacon had twisted wrong into profit. Orrin had benefited from a hidden kindness and helped bury the cost. Even Tobin's mother had lived with money she may have suspected but could not prove. Nothing in the story held still long enough to hate cleanly. Behind them, Ruth gave a low sound, not a warning this time. A puppy had shifted away from the nest. Tobin went in and stopped at the line, Ruth still guarded. The small one, the same one he had helped breathe, had wriggled toward the edge of the blanket. Ruth looked from the puppy to Tobin. She did not move. It took him a second to understand. Her body was curled around 4 others. Rising would disturb them. Reaching across the nest would cost her strength. Tobin crouched. "You sure?" Ruth watched his hands. Slowly, he extended one palm. He touched the puppy with 2 fingers, then slid it back toward its mother. Ruth lowered her nose over the pup, counted it in her own silent way, and settled again. Orrin stood in the doorway, seeing more than Tobin wanted him to see. "Trust can arrive before forgiveness," the old man said. Tobin did not answer. That afternoon, Priya and Ansel drove to the county records office while the farmers gathered their documents. Prairie Crown's public numbers were clean enough at first glance. That was expected. Priya cared less about clean numbers than about numbers that were clean in the same way too often. By 4 o'clock, she had found a recurring name, Nels Halverson. Nels was the current scalehouse supervisor at Prairie Crown, 51, with a tired round face, a heavy yellow-gray mustache, and hands that seemed permanently marked by graphite and machine oil. When Ansel and Priya spoke with him at the scalehouse, Tobin was not present. Ansel told him that twice by phone, probably because he knew Tobin was parked outside the annex, staring at the road. Later, Ansel summarized only what he could. "Nels says the equipment drifts in winter. Does it? All equipment can drift. Priya says that is why calibration logs exist. And Nels got uncomfortable when she asked for originals." Tobin looked toward the silos, where the late sun had turned the metal towers the color of old bone. "Deacon sent a formal notice, 7 days from the start of your temporary animal hold. He wants the room cleared when the emergency authorization expires. He knows about the box. We don't know that. He will." Ansel was quiet for a beat. "A maintenance clerk saw you remove something from the wall. Word travels fast in a place built around waiting trucks." Tobin closed his eyes. "Do not talk to Deacon," Ansel said. "I heard you the first time. I am saying it again because you heard me the first time and hated it." The call ended. Evening settled blue across Prairie Crown Annex. Linny arrived to check Ruth and found Tobin replacing a water dish while sitting on the floor, his left leg extended stiffly in front of him. "You're favoring it," she said. "It's favoring drama. That is a medical phrase I have never used. I'm expanding your vocabulary." He tried to stand too quickly. Pain caught him low in the spine and moved down through his hip like a wire pulled tight. His hand hit the concrete wall before his knee could follow. He stayed upright, but only because pride was stubborn and the wall was close. Ruth rose. Not all the way. She did not abandon the puppies. She stepped just far enough from the nest to bridge the distance between them, her dark body thin and tired, her folded ear tilted toward the sound of his breathing. Tobin froze. Ruth lowered her head and touched her nose to his wrist. Once. Then she turned back to the litter, as if she had only inspected a loose hinge and found it temporarily acceptable. Linnea said nothing for several seconds. Tobin looked at the place where Ruth's nose had touched him. "She isn't fixing anything," he said. "No," Linnea replied. She noticed. That was somehow harder to dismiss. Night came down over the fields, clear and silver. Tobin filed his second statement for Ansel by email, logged the puppy's weight, and checked the heater twice instead of 3 times. He did not read Reuben's letters. They were no longer in his keeping, and perhaps that was the only mercy he had earned that day. Before he turned off the lantern, he stood at the doorway of the warm room. Ruth lay around her 5 puppies, eyes half closed. Her breathing was slower now, less guarded but not careless. Tobin understood the difference. Somewhere beyond the silos, a cooperative manager was learning that an old box had come out of a wall. Somewhere in the sheriff's office, Priya Desai was following marks and numbers instead of family legends. Somewhere in Orrin Bjerke's farmhouse, an old man was sitting with the truth he had delayed, and here, behind concrete and patched insulation, a mother dog had touched the wrist of a man who still believed pain should be hidden if it could not be solved. Ruth had not healed him. She had simply refused to be fooled by his silence. Priya Desai did not treat Prairie Crown's records as a mystery. She treated them like weather. Patterns mattered. Pressure mattered. Small changes, repeated long enough, could bury a county under consequences no one noticed until the roads disappeared. By the end of her second day in Red Willow County, she had taken over the back conference room at the sheriff's office, with maps, settlement sheets, calibration summaries, and printouts from 3 independent sources: a county weather station, a certified grain lab in the next county, a storage facility 29 miles east that had tested samples from the same producers. Prairie Crown had marked down. Tobin Ashford was not in the room. That was the rule. He stood outside in the hallway, close enough to hear the copier run and far enough to obey Sheriff Ansel Dwyer. The boundary felt childish and necessary at the same time. Ansel came out carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. "You are wearing a groove in my floor," he said. "I'm preserving circulation. You're brooding. That isn't prohibited in the policy manual." Ansel handed him a cup. Yet, through the half-open door, Priya's voice remained level. "The deviation is not random. Smaller producers are being graded higher for moisture at Prairie Crown than at outside facilities. Larger accounts show less variance and fewer deductions." A deputy asked something Tobin could not hear. Priya answered, "I am saying the numbers lean in one direction too often to be weather." Tobin looked down at the coffee. It was bad but warm. That afternoon, Priya requested records tied to a company called Sorensen Field Logistics. The name sat on several invoices as if it belonged there: hauling fees, emergency transfer fees, snow route surcharges, equipment coordination. The amounts were never large enough to command attention alone. Together, they formed a second river running beside Prairie Crown's official books. Ansel read the public registration in silence. "Owner of record is Deacon's brother-in-law," he said. Priya marked it with her cobalt pencil. "That does not prove illegal conduct. It proves the need to ask better questions." Tobin stayed quiet. He had learned over the years that anger loved incomplete evidence. Anger could build a courtroom from a receipt and a suspicion. Priya refused to give it that satisfaction. Later, Ansel and Priya spoke again with Nels Halvorsen at the Scale House. Tobin was not there for that either. He heard about it afterward in Ansel's office, where the sheriff closed the door before speaking. "Nels says winter affects the readings," Ansel said. "It can." Priya agrees. She also says the adjustments cluster before deliveries from farms carrying late bank notices. Tobin's eyes lifted. Ansel held up a hand. "You are still not in it. I'm listening. You listen like you're loading a rifle." Tobin breathed through his nose and said nothing. Ansel softened by 1 degree. Nels has not flipped. He gave us enough technical language to sound cooperative and nothing original enough to help. Priya wants the raw calibration logs, not copies. Prairie Crown has not produced them. Deacon won't hand over anything that matters. Maybe he delays until he knows what we know. Tobin thought of the employee who had seen him carry the tin box out of the wall. "He knows enough." The sheriff recapped his pen. "Then we stay clean. Clean." The word followed Tobin back to Prairie Crown Annex. The winter sun had begun to drop, turning the silos rose gold against the flat fields. The yard looked peaceful from a distance, the way old places did when snow covered their rust. Inside the warm room, Ruth was restless. Linnea knelt beside the nest with a thermometer in one hand and a frown she did not bother hiding. Maribel Knox stood near the doorway, mustard jacket unzipped, clipboard tucked under her arm. "Her temperature is up," Linnea said. Tobin stepped closer and Ruth lifted her head. No growl. That was new enough that everyone noticed. "She's still nursing," Linnea continued, "but not producing enough for all 5. The 2 smallest need supplemental feeding tonight." "I can do it," Tobin said. "You can help," Maribel corrected. "That is not the same sentence." He looked at her. She looked back with the calm authority of a woman who had removed raccoons from attics, frightened dogs from culverts, and unreasonable men from the center of decisions about animals. Linnea packed her bag. "I want Ruth at my clinic for monitoring." Tobin's answer arrived too fast. "No." Ruth's ear shifted. Linnea did not argue immediately. She let the word hang until Tobin heard how much fear it contained. "The roads are open now," she said. "The clinic has a heated isolation room and better equipment." I can treat her there without making guesses in a concrete box. She just started trusting this room. She started trusting safe behavior. Not walls. Tobin felt his left foot going numb. He hated that it chose that moment, as though his body wanted to vote against him in public. He shifted weight to his right leg. Maribel noticed. Linnea noticed. Ruth noticed. Tobin hated that too. I can drive her, he said. No, Linnea said. The refusal was quiet, but it did not bend. You are favoring your leg, she continued. Ruth is feverish, protective, and attached to 5 newborns. If something changes on the road, I need hands that are not pretending pain is a scheduling problem. Maribel held out her palm. Keys. Tobin did not move. The key ring sat in his coat pocket. Control house, outer gate, maintenance room, old electrical cabinet, storage padlock. For 3 years, those keys had been his proof that the place asked nothing of anyone else. He knew which one stuck in freezing weather, which one needed a lift before turning, which one opened a room no one visited. Maribel waited. Linnea waited. Across the room, Ruth pushed her nose beneath one of the smallest puppies and tucked it closer to her belly. Tobin looked at the dog. She had spent every ounce of strength drawing lines no one was allowed to cross. Now her own body had become the thing threatening those lines. He took out the keys. His hand did not want to release them. Maribel did not snatch them. She let the ring rest on Tobin's palm until he chose to turn his hand over. Metal clicked softly into her glove. It was a small sound. It felt like a gate opening. I'll follow, he said. You can meet us there, Linnea replied, after you let Deputy Ames drive you. I can drive. Your pride can drive, Maribel said. Your left leg is not submitting an application. Under different circumstances, he might have admired the line. At the clinic, Ruth was placed in a quiet, heated room with dimmed lights and clean bedding. Linnea used medication safe for nursing and showed Tobin how to bottle feed the 2 smaller pups without rushing them. A volunteer from the rescue group, a broad-shouldered woman with silver hair and a fleece vest covered in dog fur, took the second feeding shift. Tobin stayed against the wall, not because anyone ordered him to, because that was where he could see the door, Ruth, the puppies, and the people touching them. Ruth watched him from the bedding. Exhaustion had lowered her defenses, but not erased them. When Linnea checked her abdomen, Ruth stiffened. When the volunteer lifted one puppy, Ruth tracked the movement with fierce attention. Tobin took half a step forward. Linnea did not look up. Let her see that help does not only come from you. The words struck harder than they should have. He remained still. The smallest puppy took formula from the bottle, slow and stubborn. Its paws pressed against Tobin's fingers when his turn came. The body was warmer now, the breath steady. Tobin counted the swallows because counting gave him something to do besides feel. Near midnight, his phone vibrated. The caller ID read Erin Talcott. He almost ignored it. He had ignored her before. 3 voicemails in 6 months. Polite. Persistent. A veteran service officer from the county who believed there might still be a way to reopen his treatment file. Tobin had deleted the first message after hearing the words, additional documentation. He had saved the second and never played it again. The third remained unopened. He stepped into the clinic hallway and answered. This is Ashford. A warm, steady voice came through. Sergeant Ashford, Erin Talcott. I know this is late. Sheriff Dwyer said you were awake and less likely to hang up if I called before morning. That sounds like Ansel. It was his gentler version. Tobin leaned against the wall. What do you need? Your signature. I found a reference to an evacuation report filed under a Rotary Wing Medical Support Unit, not your SEAL team's records. It may explain the mismatch that caused the denials. His throat tightened before he could stop it. How many maybes are in that sentence? He asked. Enough that I will not promise you a win, Erin said. Not enough that I'm willing to let the file stay closed. That was different from sympathy. Sympathy often arrived dressed as certainty it had not earned. Erin continued, I can request the Joint Archive packet, but I need authorization. You have declined to respond before. That is your right. I am asking again because sometimes the document exists in the wrong drawer, and nobody checks the wrong drawer unless someone makes them. Through the small clinic window, Tobin could see Linnea kneeling beside Ruth while Maribel prepared another clean blanket. Ruth's eyes were open. She allowed the blanket change because she had no better way to protect her pups than to let capable hands help. Tobin closed his eyes. For years he had mistaken refusal for control. He had called it self-respect when it was exhaustion wearing a uniform. "Send it," he said. Aaron was quiet for one beat. "I'll email the release now. You can sign electronically. I didn't say I trust the process. I didn't ask you to. I asked for permission to look. That was enough." He signed on his phone in the hallway under a buzzing light while snowmelt dripped from the clinic roof outside. When he returned to the room, Linnea looked at him but did not ask. "Ruth's fever is responding," she said. "Not gone. Better." Tobin nodded. Maribel handed him a bottle. "Your shift, not your kingdom." This time he took it without correcting her. Dawn spread pale over Red Willow County with no drama at all. The 5 puppies slept in a heap against Ruth's side. Ruth lifted her head as Tobin approached and let him place the smallest pup near her without warning him away. Her trust was not surrender. It was a decision made under watchful conditions. Tobin understood that better than most people. Before leaving the clinic, he called Ansel. "I need Priya to have everything from the box," he said. "Not just the tickets, the letters too." Ansel did not answer immediately. "Some of that is personal. I know. Some of it may put your father in the wrong light." It should. The words surprised him by how steady they were. He looked through the glass at Ruth, her dark body curved around 5 lives that could not survive on her strength alone. "I don't need him innocent," Tobin said. "I need it true." Ansel's voice came back lower. "I'll document the transfer." By noon, Priya had the complete set. Reuben's unfinished confession, the carbon copies, the money order stubs, the grain tickets, and the notebook. Tobin signed a supplemental statement acknowledging that some materials implicated his father in early improper adjustments. Orrin Bjerke arrived at the sheriff's office just as Tobin was leaving. The old farmer held his red cap in both hands. Snow clung to the shoulders of his faded coat. He looked smaller without the height of his pride. "I was one of them," Orrin said. Tobin stopped. "One of who?" "One of the farms that took money from Reuben's side account. It kept my land out of foreclosure that year." Orrin's voice thinned. "When he said he wanted to tell someone what Deacon was doing, I told him to wait. I told him the whole county would pay if he opened his mouth." Tobin stared at him. For a moment, he saw all the years between them not as time, but as a field left unharvested until rot became part of the soil. "You brought me to that silo," Tobin said, "because you wanted forgiveness without confession." Orrin did not defend himself. Yes, that honesty did not make Tobin feel merciful. Not yet. He walked past Orrin into the cold. The day was bright, almost painfully so. Snow along the courthouse steps had begun to melt in the sun, dripping from the rail in patient drops. Tobin did not know whether truth would save Prairie Crown or bury it, or simply force everyone to stop pretending the ground was solid. He only knew that his father's story no longer belonged to grief alone. It belonged to evidence. It belonged to the farmers whose numbers had been bent. It belonged to a mother dog in a clinic room who had survived because other hands had been allowed near what she loved most. And for the first time in years, Tobin wondered whether accepting help might be less like losing control and more like telling the truth about what one person could not carry alone. Ruth returned to the warm room 2 days after the fever broke. Linnea Broder did not call it a recovery. She called it a supervised improvement, which meant Tobin Ashford was allowed to bring the mother dog and 5 puppies back to Prairie Crown Annex, only after he agreed to 3 conditions: twice daily updates, no missed temperature logs, and no pretending his own spine had become irrelevant to the work. Maribel Knox added a 4th condition, while buckling the travel crate into the back of the county animal control truck. "If you start acting like the only person qualified to hold a bottle, I will personally replace you with a church quilting circle," she said. Tobin looked at the 5 sleeping puppies. "Do they have training?" "They have snacks and opinions. That gets most committees started." Ruth watched the exchange from a padded crate beside them. Her eyes were still sharp, but the hard, feverish shine had faded. The crescent of pale fur beneath her throat showed when she lifted her head toward Tobin's voice. By evening, the puppies were back beneath the old dryer pipe, the blankets clean, the heater humming, the room steady and warm. Ruth settled around them with the grave concentration of a mother who had accepted help without surrendering authority. That same evening, a preservation order reached Prairie Crown Grain Cooperative. It came through proper channels, signed and stamped, requiring the cooperative to retain scale records, calibration data, settlement sheets, storage invoices, electronic backups, and communications related to moisture adjustments. Deacon Sorensen read it in his office with the door closed. Nels Halverson saw him through the glass partition of the scale house. Deacon did not shout. He did not throw anything. He simply stood very still, one hand touching the bare place on his finger where he still wore the habit of a ring. That frightened Nels more than anger would have. Nels had worked around machines long enough to know that the quiet failures were the dangerous ones. A belt that squealed gave warning. A motor that went silent could mean the whole line was about to stop. Later, Deacon came into the scale house wearing his camel coat and clean gloves, too polished for a man standing beside grain dust and salt-streaked floors. "Nels," he said, "do you remember the service access beneath the rear maintenance room?" Nels kept his eyes on the monitor. "Which access?" "The old dryer controls. Behind the space the dog is occupying." The word dog did not land kindly. Nels turned a paper cup in both hands. He was 51, heavy through the shoulders and stomach, with a tired round face, a yellow-gray mustache, and fingers permanently darkened by years of oil, graphite, and equipment dust. The orange knit cap he usually wore hung on the hook behind him, bright as a warning he had chosen not to read. "There's nothing down there but conduit," he said. Deacon smiled faintly. "Then it will not matter if maintenance confirms that." "Tonight?" "Soon." Nels looked up then. "There's a mother dog in that room. There is an unauthorized animal hold in a cooperative facility." Deacon's voice stayed pleasant. "Do not confuse sentiment with compliance." Nels wanted to say more. He did not. He had signed too many calibration summaries, adjusted too many margins, told himself too often that winter caused strange readings, and small farms always argued with numbers when payments came short. A man could spend years calling himself practical until the word became a locked door. That night, temperature fell fast. The sky stayed clear, and the stars over Red Willow County looked sharp enough to cut fence wire. Snowfields reflected moonlight in pale strips. The old silos stood motionless at Prairie Crown Annex, the metal skins blue-white in the cold. Tobin was not there at 9:12 p.m. Dispatch called him to a highway accident near the county line. No sirens were needed by the time he arrived. The scene required traffic control, statements, and patience in a wind that found every seam in his coat. He kept moving to prevent his left leg from stiffening, but by the time the tow truck cleared the last vehicle, pain had begun to climb his back in measured steps. His phone buzzed just as he returned to his cruiser. A temperature alert. Warm room, 58 degrees Fair and falling. Tobin stared at the screen. The backup heater had its own battery-powered alarm. He had installed it after Ruth's fever, mostly because anxiety became more tolerable when disguised as redundancy. He called Linnea first. "Temperature drop," he said. "Prairie Crown Annex. I'm 20 minutes out." "I'll meet you there," Linnea answered, instantly awake. He called Ansel next. The sheriff picked up on the second ring. "Talk. Heat alarm. Warm room falling. I'm returning from the highway call. I'll send a unit." Before Tobin could start the engine, another call came in. Orrin Björk. Tobin answered through the cruiser speaker. "Orrin, there's a Prairie Crown service truck at the annex," Orrin said. His voice was tight with cold and urgency. "No headlights now. Saw it when I came down the north road with the plow. 2 men, not scheduled. Where are you?" "By the old spur gate. I called Ansel first. That mattered. For once, Orrin had not tried to carry fear in silence until it turned into damage. "Stay in your truck," Tobin said. "Do not approach. I know." "Say it." "I will not approach." Tobin drove toward the annex without using lights or siren once he left the highway. The tires whispered over packed snow. His uniform collar pressed against his jaw. The brick-red neck warmer felt too tight. He arrived before Ansel's deputy. A service truck sat near the rear loading door, angled poorly, as if the driver had expected to leave in a hurry. The maintenance room window was dark. No warm glow from the lantern, no pale line beneath the door. Tobin parked behind the old scale office, radioed his position, and waited long enough to make himself do it correctly. Dispatch, Ashford on scene. Visual on unauthorized vehicle. Possible 2 subjects inside rear maintenance area. Holding position until backup arrives. The words tasted like discipline. He moved along the outer wall, keeping low and using the shadow of the conveyor housing. Through a gap near the loading door he saw movement inside. 2 men, not masked, not dramatic, work jackets, gloves. One held a pry tool, the other swept a flashlight across the floor. That ordinary appearance made the trespass feel uglier, not smaller. Tobin recognized one of them, Lloyd Rask, a Prairie Crown maintenance hand in his 30s, thin-faced and nervous, always carrying a thermos with a cracked lid. The other, Cal Hembry, was older, broad-necked, a cousin of someone on the cooperative board. Men who knew keys, doors, and where cameras pointed. Tobin did not enter. He gave their position to dispatch. Then a sound came from the warm room. A puppy, thin, cold, wrong. Every rule inside Tobin divided at once. One of the men slipped through the rear service door and ran toward the machinery shed. Tobin saw him cross the snow. He could have followed. He knew the angle, knew the distance, knew how to cut him off before the shed. Another puppy cried. The sound was smaller than the first. Tobin stopped. For half a second he stood between the clean shape of duty and the living sound behind the wall. Then he turned toward the warm room. Not every chase was worth what it left undefended. He entered with his flashlight low and his voice already calm. Ruth, the room was colder than it should have been. The main heater was off. The lantern had been unplugged. The nest had been dragged nearly 8 feet toward the loading door, exposing a square of old flooring where the men had begun prying at the seams. The outer door stood open wide enough for the night to pour in. Ruth lay between the puppies and that open cold. Her body was tense, one shoulder held awkwardly, her dark coat ruffled where the metal door had caught her. She did not rise. She could not without leaving the puppies. Her amber eyes locked on Tobin, fierce and exhausted. "I see you," he said. The phrase came without thought. He closed the loading door first. Then he placed himself on the floor outside Ruth's reach and pushed his patrol coat toward the puppies. One had rolled partly away from the others, its small body too still for his liking. "Easy, girl. I'm not taking them." Ruth's lips lifted once, more fear than threat. Tobin slowed. He removed his gloves so she could smell his hands. The cold bit at his fingers immediately. He let her see each movement before reaching for the nearest puppy. Ruth trembled. He slid the puppy closer to her belly and tucked the coat around the litter, leaving the mother's body uncovered so she did not feel trapped. He activated 2 chemical heat packs from the emergency kit and wrapped them in towels before placing them near, not against, the smallest pups. The portable heater from his cruiser came next. He ran the cord through the side window to the inverter, set it low, and angled the air toward the wall instead of directly at the animals. All the while he spoke to Ruth. Not commands. Weather. Temperatures. Useless facts. The kind of words that carried tone without demanding trust. 54 and rising. Doors closed. Linea's coming. Ansel's sending units. You held your line. I know. Ruth lowered her head at last. Not surrender. Tobin no longer mistook that for trust. It was triage. He lifted each puppy only long enough to check warmth and breathing, then returned it to Ruth's belly. When he moved the smallest one, Ruth placed her muzzle against his wrist. No growl, no warning, only contact. Outside, an engine turned over. Tobin looked toward the door, but he did not move away from the litter. A deputy's lights washed blue across the window before the truck could pull out. Voices followed. Boots on snow. Ansel's calm command carrying through the night. Linnea arrived minutes later with Maribel behind her. The veterinarian took in the room in one sweeping glance. Displaced nest, open floor panel, unplugged heater, Ruth's shoulder, Tobin's coat wrapped around the puppies. "What happened?" 2 entered, Tobin said. 1 fled, 1 contained outside. Heat cut, nest moved. Linnea knelt near Ruth. "Did you chase?" "No." Maribel looked at him sharply, as if the answer mattered for reasons no report would capture. Tobin kept his eyes on Ruth. "I heard the pups." Linnea's expression changed, but she did not praise him. Praise would have made the choice too clean. "Good," she said instead. "Hold this towel." Ruth had a shallow tear near the shoulder and bruising beneath the fur. Nothing appeared broken. Linnea treated the injury with steady hands and medication safe for nursing. 2 puppies were colder than they should have been, but both responded to warming and supplemental formula. Maribel documented everything: photographs, thermometer readings, the cut power line to the heater, the pulled bedding, the pry marks near the service panel. "This was not an animal complaint," she said quietly. "No," Ansel answered from the doorway. "It was a search." The captured man, Lloyd Rask, sat in the back of a deputy's cruiser, pale and shaking. Cal Hembry had escaped across the yard, but left behind a tool bag near the service hatch. Inside it were a hand-drawn diagram of the rear maintenance room, 2 old cooperative keys, and a printed note with measurements to the floor panel. No signature, but one notation used Deacon Sorensen's office printer code at the bottom of the page. Ansel did not overstate it. "This proves access," he said. "It does not yet prove who ordered what." Tobin wanted the sentence to be enough. It was not. He also knew Ansel was right. By midnight, the warm room had been restored. Ruth slept under sedation light enough not to interfere with nursing. The puppies had been fed and settled. Linnea insisted on remaining for the next few hours, and Maribel refused to leave until she had filed the emergency report. Orrin stood outside by his plow truck, hat in both hands despite the cold. Tobin joined him near the old spur gate. "I called Ansel first," Orrin said. "I know. Should done that years ago." Tobin looked across the yard toward the glowing maintenance room window. Yes, the word was not forgiveness. Orrin accepted it anyway. Far across town, in a small house behind the sheriff's office, Nels Halvorsen sat at his kitchen table with the lights off. His wife had gone to bed hours earlier. The house smelled faintly of coffee grounds and furnace dust. On the table lay a black calibration log wrapped in a clear plastic bag. Its edges were greasy from years hidden above a ceiling panel in the scale house. Nels had kept it because part of him had always known the copies were lies. He had not kept it out of courage. He had kept it because cowardice sometimes wanted an exit saved for later. At 1:37 a.m., Nels put on his dark parka, forgot his orange cap, and drove to Sheriff Ansel Dwyer's house. Ansel opened the door in flannel and an old wool vest, his face alert before the porch light fully caught Nels standing there. Nels held out the wrapped log with both hands. "I can't make it right," he said. Snow moved softly behind him. "But I can stop making it worse." By sunrise, the calibration log Nels Halvorsen had carried to Sheriff Ansel Dwyer's porch was no longer just a guilty man's confession. It had become a map. Priya Desai spread the pages across the sheriff's conference table under the hard white light of the ceiling fixtures. The old log smelled faintly of oil, paper dust, and the inside of a scale house that had known too many winters. Unlike the copies Prairie Crown had produced, this one carried handwritten corrections, initials, temperature notes, and a second column Nels had never entered into the official system. Moisture adjustments, manual overrides, dates, names of farms. The pattern was no longer merely suspicious, it had shape. Nels sat at the end of the table with his hands folded around a paper cup he had not drunk from. Without his orange cap, he looked older, softer, and more exposed. The yellow-gray mustache that usually made him seem stubborn now made him look like a man trying to hide behind a habit that had failed him. "I told myself the machines drifted," he said. Priya did not look up from the log. Machines drift. These entries were steered. Nels closed his eyes. Ansel stood near the door, arms folded, his silver sheriff's star catching a dull flash of light each time he shifted. Tobin Ashford remained beside the window because Ansel had allowed him to be present for safety context only, not investigation. The distinction still mattered. Tobin hated that it mattered. He respected that it mattered. "Who told you to change the figures?" Ansel asked. Nels stared into the coffee. "Deacon, not every time directly. Sometimes it was a note on the desk, sometimes a call after a truck pulled in. Sometimes he'd say, 'That farm is already behind. Don't let sentiment write the settlement.'" Priya marked a page with her cobalt pencil. "And the raw data?" Nels swallowed. "Some of it backs up to the North Scale house, old terminal. It was supposed to be disconnected when the new software came in." "Was it?" Ansel asked. "No. Deacon didn't know I knew that." Tobin looked at him then. Nels did not look back. "I kept the log because I thought someday I might need proof that it wasn't all me." "That's not the same as making it right," Tobin said. Nels flinched, but he nodded. "No, it isn't." By 9 o'clock, Assistant County Attorney Hazel Trent had arrived with her winter coat, still buttoned wrong from haste. She was a narrow-faced woman in her late 30s with auburn hair pinned low and a manner that made everyone sit straighter without knowing why. She did not waste words. "If the North Scale house contains records outside the original warrant scope, I'll request a supplemental order," she said. "But we need to move cleanly." Any hint that Sergeant Ashford guided this because of his father, Deacon's attorney will carve a door through the middle of it. Ansel glanced at Tobin. Tobin gave one short nod. He had spent years believing being kept out meant being dismissed. Now he was beginning to understand that restraint could also be a form of protection. Not comfort. Protection. While Hazel filed the request, Prairie Crown's member meeting went forward as planned. The cooperative hall sat beside the old rail spur, a square brick building with tall windows and a flagpole half buried in snow. By late morning, pickups lined both sides of the county road. Farmers came in work coats, church coats, seed company caps, and boots still dusted with grain powder. Some brought folders, some brought spouses. A few brought teenagers old enough to understand that money missing from a settlement sheet could mean a truck not repaired, a loan not renewed, or a kitchen table conversation held too late at night. Tobin parked at the far edge of the lot. He wore no uniform, no badge. Just a gray shirt, a navy wool jacket, dark pants, and the faded brick-red neck warmer tucked at his throat. The absence of the badge felt heavier than wearing it. In uniform, he knew where his hands belonged. Without it, he was simply a man whose father's name had returned inside a tin box. Linnea Broder arrived a few minutes later from the clinic, her brick-red parka open over a gray sweater. She had left Ruth and the puppies under Maribel's watch. "Ruth is stable," she said before he asked. "Smallest two took formula. Mother ate half a bowl. No fever spike. Thank you. She does not require your worrying to stay alive. I'm aware. You say that like someone who is not aware." Tobin almost smiled. Across the lot, Orrin Bjerke stood by his blue pickup, red cap in his hands despite the cold. Nels was near the entrance, shoulders rounded, eyes on the ground. Neither man approached Tobin. That was probably wise. Inside, the hall smelled of coffee, melting snow, wool, and old varnish. Deacon Sorensen stood near the front beneath the cooperative seal, dressed in a dark blue suit, white shirt, and a wheat-colored tie. His silver-blonde hair was smooth, his expression solemn, his hands arranged neatly around the edge of the podium. He looked like a man prepared to bury bad news with dignity. That was his gift. He could make surrender sound like stewardship. The board chair called the meeting to order. The agenda had been mailed weeks earlier. Final vote on the proposed sale of Prairie Crown's assets to a regional grain company. Deacon presented the sale as the only responsible path. Rising costs, aging equipment, narrow margins, unpredictable markets. He spoke of protecting producers from collapse, paying outstanding settlements, and preserving at least some local jobs. Then he turned, not dramatically, only enough for everyone to know the next words had been waiting. There is also a great deal of confusion being introduced by old materials recently discovered at the annex, Deacon said. Materials connected to Tobin Ashford, a former employee whose undocumented practices are, sadly, now being used to cast suspicion over this cooperative. The room shifted. Tobin felt Linnea look at him. Deacon continued, voice gentle enough to pass for concern. "I sympathize with Sergeant Ashford. Every son wants a cleaner story about his father. But grief does not balance books. We cannot allow personal redemption to destroy the only institution still capable of paying producers this winter." There it was. Not an accusation shouted. A knife set politely on the table. Tobin stood. Ansel, who had taken a position along the side wall, did not stop him. Tobin was not entering as an investigator. He was entering as the man Deacon had named. He walked to the front without hurry. His left leg dragged half a beat on the second step up to the platform. He did not hide it. For once he let the room see the delay. "I'm not here as a deputy," he said. His voice carried less force than Deacon's and more weight. "I'm not here to clear my father's name." That silenced the whispering more effectively than anger would have. Tobin unfolded a copy of Reuben's unfinished letter. "My father, Tobin Ashford, helped create a system outside the rules. He signed false tickets. He left his family. He waited too long to tell the truth. If anyone came here expecting me to say he was innocent, I won't." At the rear of the hall, someone exhaled sharply. Tobin kept reading, but he also wrote this: "A mercy we hide from daylight becomes a tool for whoever controls the dark. If no one is allowed to question it, it will stop saving people and start choosing who can be spent." No one moved. Tobin lowered the paper. "I do not know how much good my father meant to do. I do know good intentions did not protect the people whose tickets kept coming back with numbers that leaned against them." Orrin stood then. The old farmer used his cane to steady himself, but his voice reached the front. "I was one of the farms helped by that hidden account," Orrin said. "It kept my land out of foreclosure. When Reuben wanted to report what Deacon was doing, I told him to wait. I told him too many people would suffer." His mouth worked once before he continued. "I was afraid of losing my farm. Then I was afraid of admitting what saved it. If the court says I owe that money back, I'll answer for it." The room changed again, not toward forgiveness, toward recognition. Nels rose next. His face was gray, and both hands shook around the folder he carried. "I adjusted readings," he said. "I signed reports I knew weren't right. I told myself winter drift was enough explanation. It wasn't. Deacon directed the pattern, but my name is on the work." Deacon's face hardened for the first time. "Nels," he said quietly, "you should be careful." Nels looked at him, and something tired inside the man finally stopped kneeling. "I should have been careful years ago." A murmur moved through the hall, not loud, but deep. The story was no longer one clean villain and a room full of innocent people. It had become harder than that. People who had trusted Prairie Crown had also ignored what seemed too complicated to challenge. People who had received help had feared the cost of examining where it came from. People who had signed the wrong page had hoped no one would ask who benefited. Priya stepped forward only after the room had sat with that. She wore her dark suit and black square glasses, a stack of papers held close to her chest. Her voice did not offer rescue. "There are 3 realistic choices," she said. "Sell today and risk moving assets before independent review. Close operations entirely while records are sorted, which could delay payments further. Or vote to suspend the sale, allow independent administration, audit inventory and settlements, and pursue a bridge credit line based on verified assets." A farmer near the middle called out, "Are you saying the state will cover what's missing?" "No," Priya said. The answer was flat and mercifully honest. "I am saying there are tools to reduce damage if the cooperative cooperates. I cannot promise full recovery. I cannot promise speed. I can tell you that selling before the records are preserved may make recovery harder." Deacon returned to the podium. "You have just heard it," he said. "No guarantee, no funding, no payment date, only process. People in this room have operating loans due, fuel bills, equipment notes, seed contracts. Process will not keep your farms warm." Tobin looked across the faces before him. Fear had entered the hall like another weather system. He could not fight it with certainty. Certainty would have been a lie, so he said the only thing he knew how to say honestly. "He's right that truth may cost you. He's wrong that hiding from it has been free." The vote took 38 minutes. No one applauded when the result was read. The members voted to suspend the sale and accept independent administration pending audit. Some people cried quietly. Others sat with their faces in their hands. A few looked furious enough to leave without coats. Hope did not fill the room, neither did victory, only consequence. Then a chair scraped near the front. Deacon Sorensen was gone. Ansel touched his radio and stepped into the side hall. Tobin saw the movement and understood, but he did not follow. Minutes later, the hall erupted into overlapping voices, as people realized Deacon had left before the final count. A farmer near the back clutched his chest and sat down hard on a folding chair. His wife shouted his name. Tobin moved toward them without thinking, not as an investigator, not as a son, as a police sergeant in a room full of frightened people. "Give him space," he said. "Chair line back. Ansel, I need EMS started." Linnea appeared beside him, already checking the man's pulse and breathing. Tobin directed people toward the exits in slow sections, keeping the doors clear and the crowd from pressing inward. Outside, sirens stayed distant and controlled. Across the county, Ansel and state investigators had already moved on the North Scale house based on Nels's disclosure and Hazel Trent's supplemental order. Deacon was found inside the small building, gloves on, a panel open beneath the old terminal. He had not fled far. Men like Deacon did not believe consequences applied if they could still reach the paperwork first. By the time Ansel called Tobin, EMS had loaded the farmer for precautionary care, and the hall had quieted to exhausted clusters of people. "Deacon is in custody," Ansel said. "Storage device secured. No one hurt." Tobin closed his eyes briefly. "You didn't chase him," Ansel added. "No, you stayed where people needed you." Tobin looked around the hall, at Linnea wiping her hands with a paper towel, at Orrin sitting alone with his cane across his knees, at Nels speaking quietly to Hazel Trent, at farmers staring through the tall windows toward the white fields that still had to be survived. "I guess I did," he said. After the call ended, Tobin stepped outside. Winter sunlight flashed across the snow, so brightly it seemed almost cruel. The Prairie Crown sign stood above the parking lot, its painted wheat sheaf cracked by years of weather. A few miles away, Deacon was being driven toward the sheriff's office. Inside the hall, no one was celebrating. That felt right. Justice had not arrived like thunder. It had arrived like a bill coming due. Tobin stood in the cold without his badge on his chest and felt, for the first time that day, no need to prove he belonged on either side of the law. Doing right had not required him to be the handcuffs. This time it had required him to stay. The first thing that changed was not the money. It was the locks. Within a week of Deacon Sorensen's arrest, Prairie Crown's main office, scale house, server cabinet, and settlement files were placed under independent administration. The old cooperative sign still stood beside the road, cracked paint and all, but the keys no longer rested in one man's desk drawer. Sheriff Ansel Dwyer called it a beginning, not a victory. Priya Desai called it preservation. Most farmers called it late. Deacon was charged with fraud, falsified records, obstruction, and an unlawful attempt to move cooperative assets before audit. Lloyd Rask entered a plea on the unlawful entry at the annex and agreed to testify. Cal Hembry turned himself in 3 days later through an attorney. Nels Halverson cooperated fully, but cooperation did not erase the years of signed reports. He lost his position at the scale house and waited for the county attorney's decision on lesser charges. No one in Red Willow County got the satisfaction of a simple ending. Some money was frozen, some was traced, some had already moved too far to return quickly. A few farmers received partial emergency payments through a bridge credit line arranged after the inventory audit. Others sold a tractor, delayed repairs, or sat at kitchen tables making winter stretch farther than it had any right to stretch. Justice stopped the bleeding. It did not replace all that had been lost. Tobin Ashford understood that kind of repair. He returned to Prairie Crown Annex each evening, not as an investigator, and not as a man hiding from town. He returned because the warm room still held Ruth and the 5 puppies, and because living things did not care whether a court docket was moving slowly. They cared whether the heater worked. They cared whether milk arrived on time. They cared whether the hands reaching toward them were steady. Ruth healed with the same cautious dignity she had shown from the first morning. The shallow tear on her shoulder closed cleanly under Linnea Broder's care. Her milk returned enough that only the 2 smallest pups needed formula now and then. She still watched every visitor, but her warnings had become more selective. She no longer objected when Maribel Knox entered with her clipboard, or when Linnea knelt near the nest. With Tobin, Ruth had become something harder to name. She did not follow him like a trained dog. She did not obey commands with polished certainty. She chose proximity. When he crossed the room, her eyes moved with him. When his left leg dragged after a long shift, she stood without drama and placed herself near the path he was taking, as if the floor needed a witness. The smallest puppy, the one Tobin had held on the morning of the birth, grew into a narrow-faced little creature with oversized paws, a dark back, and a pale fleck under one eye. Maribel began calling him the little auditor because he inspected every shoelace, glove, and food bowl with serious disapproval. Tobin pretended not to like the name. The legal holding period passed with no verified owner coming forward. Maribel documented the notices, the missing chip, the broken collar, the medical history, and the absence of any claim. Only then did ownership become a question, not before. At the county animal office, Maribel sat across from Tobin with a stack of forms and the expression of a woman ready to ruin a sentimental plan. "You cannot keep 6 German shepherds because your heart got loud," she said. "I didn't say that. You were thinking in that direction. I was considering options. That is how men in work boots say they're about to make a foolish decision." Linnea, seated beside the exam table, said nothing. Her silence was worse than agreement. Tobin looked through the glass into the kennel room. Ruth lay on a clean blanket while the puppies climbed over one another with the clumsy confidence of small animals who had never known how close they had come to the cold. "I keep Ruth," he said. Maribel waited. "And the smallest male, if Linnea agrees he can stay with her." "The mother may correct him more than you enjoy watching," Linnea said. "But yes, they're compatible. And the others go where they fit," Tobin finished. The words were harder than he expected. He had not saved the litter to own it. He had saved it because it had needed saving. Keeping all of them would have been another version of control wearing the mask of devotion. Maribel nodded once and turned the page. The 4 other puppies were placed slowly, carefully, and with more paperwork than Tobin believed any creature under 10 pounds should require. One went to a farming couple whose adult daughters still helped with lambing season and understood long nights. One went to a rescue volunteer with a fenced property and patience sharpened by experience. One went to a veteran and his wife in a town 40 miles west, both quiet people who asked more questions about routine than affection. The last went, after independent review and much argument, to Nels Halverson's family. Nels did not ask for the puppy himself. His wife did. Maribel made it clear that the placement was not a payment for guilt, not an emblem of forgiveness, and not a way to soften public judgment. Nels would attend training, comply with follow-up visits, and understand that love offered after wrongdoing did not erase accountability. Nels accepted every condition. "I'm not asking to be thought well of," he told Tobin during the first supervised meeting. "I'm asking to do one thing carefully." Tobin looked at the puppy asleep in Nels's daughter's lap. "Then do that." The old maintenance room changed again. The grain tanks, rail spur, and working scale equipment went to the new cooperative under independent rules. Scale data would be visible to members. Equipment would be calibrated by outside technicians. Large transactions needed 2 signatures. The scale supervisor could not control settlement payments. Any related company had to disclose ownership before receiving a contract. The annex control house and rear maintenance room were no longer needed for grain operations. Under the new agreement, those spaces became a winter animal care station and paperwork assistance office for farmers, veterans, and rural families who had spent too many years being told to bring the right form after the deadline had passed. Tobin still lived in the control house, but the door was no longer a wall. On Tuesdays, Linnea held low-cost animal checkups in the warm room. On Thursdays, Erin Talcott came with her green accordion file and helped veterans trace missing records, misfiled reports, and forms that looked simple only to people who had never needed them. Once a month, Priya returned to teach cooperative members how to read their own scale data and settlement sheets. The place did not become beautiful. It became useful. Tobin preferred that. In March, Erin found the record. The evacuation report had been filed under the call sign of the helicopter medical crew, not Tobin's unit. A corpsman's note referenced his spine injury, the date, the weather, and the field transfer that had vanished from the packet reviewed 3 times before. A former teammate confirmed the details in a sworn statement. Erin called Tobin from her office. "I have enough to reopen the treatment claim," she said. Tobin stood in the warm room doorway, watching Ruth correct the smallest puppy with one firm nudge. "How many promises are in that sentence?" "None," Erin said. "But there is a path." That was all he could bear to receive. Weeks later, approval came for specialized rehabilitation and pain management. The long-term compensation review remained pending. Tobin read the letter twice and did not feel triumph. He felt tired. Then slowly he felt seen. That evening, he drove to the annex and left the letter on the table, while Ruth and the little auditor wrestled over a rope toy beneath it. He did not frame it. He did not call Ansel to announce it. He simply made an appointment. Some doors, it turned out, did not need to swing open all at once. Orrin Bjerka helped locate Reuben Ashford the old-fashioned way: county records, employment files, a death certificate, and a cemetery ledger in a neighboring county. Aaron confirmed the dates. Priya supplied copies of the employment records recovered from Prairie Crown's archive. Reuben had died years earlier under the name R. Ashford. No family had claimed the body. He had been buried in a county section where the stones were small, flat, and plain. Orrin offered to drive. Tobin allowed him to follow in his own truck. That was not forgiveness. It was only less refusal. On a pale morning with soft snow falling straight down, Tobin stood before the marker, with Ruth beside him on a green collar and leather lead. The little auditor remained with Linnea for the day. This visit belonged to the mother dog and the man who had named her. Orrin stopped at the cemetery gate and went no farther. He removed his red cap and held it in both hands. Tobin noticed. Then he let the old man remain where he was. The stone read, R. S. H. Ford, 1958-2009. No verse, no rank, no beloved anything. Tobin took from his coat pocket a copy of Reuben's unfinished letter and the first money order receipt sent to his mother through the church fund. He placed both inside a clear envelope weighted by a small fieldstone. For a long time he said nothing. Ruth sat in the snow, her dark body still, her folded ear angled toward him. She did not pull at the lead. She did not lean against his leg. She waited without demanding that grief perform itself properly. My mother deserved the truth, Tobin said at last. The words were quiet and came out rough. I deserved it too. Snow gathered along the edge of the flat stone. You did wrong, he continued. You signed things you should not have signed. You helped build something that hurt people. Then you got scared and called it protection. His hand tightened around the leash. And you sent money. You wrote letters. You tried, too late, to leave a warning behind. Ruth turned her head slightly, watching the road beyond the cemetery. Tobin breathed. I don't know what to do with all of that. The answer did not come. He had not expected one. For most of his life, he had wanted the past to resolve into something usable. A villain, a hero, a reason, a sentence clean enough to carry. Now he stood in falling snow and understood that some lives did not become clean because someone finally learned the whole story. They became human. That was less satisfying. It was also more true. I don't forgive all of it, Tobin said. But I believe you loved me. The wind moved lightly across the open ground. Ruth stood only when Tobin did. She walked beside him back to the truck, matching his slower left step without crowding him. By early April, the annex hosted its first full community day. The sun came out after a night of snow, bright on the silos and soft across the fields. The big grain bins were still working under new management. Trucks rolled through the scale house, and the digital display now faced both the operator and the producer window. At the old maintenance room, Linnea checked working dogs, barn cats, and one elderly goat whose owner insisted he had emotional importance to the family business. Aaron sat at a folding table helping a veteran complete medical forms. Priya stood beside a wall monitor showing farmers how to access their weight tickets and moisture readings before settlement. Maribel supervised the reunion of 5 growing puppies with the seriousness of a parade marshal. The puppies recognized one another mostly by chaos. They tumbled through the snow in a crooked line, legs too long, ears undecided. Bodies full of the reckless joy of animals raised warm after beginning in cold. Ruth stood near Tobin and watched them. She did not try to gather them all back. One puppy belonged to the farm couple now, one to the rescue volunteer, one to the veteran and his wife, one to Nels's family. The smallest remained at Tobin's boot, chewing the end of his lace with professional focus. Ruth had protected them long enough to let them leave. Tobin looked at the control house. Through the window, his kitchen light was on, though daylight made it unnecessary. Once, that lamp had marked the edge of a life designed not to need anyone. Now people knocked on that door with forms, questions, coffee, broken heaters, sick animals, and problems too ordinary to face alone. He still locked the door at night. He still woke sometimes with his back tight and his hands cold. He still did not trust every system that sent him a letter. But he had stopped mistaking help for ownership, procedure for rejection, and truth for a weapon that could only destroy. Linnea came to stand beside him, wiping her hands on a towel. You're staring at the building like it might run away, she said. It has a history, so do you. That was almost kind. It was accurate. I ration kindness before noon. Ruth leaned against Tobin's leg, lightly this time, not because he was falling, but because she had chosen the place. Across the yard, Orrin helped a farmer read a settlement sheet. Nels stood with his daughter near the puppy pen, listening while Maribel explained training requirements again. Ansel spoke with Priya by the scale office. Aaron laughed at something an old veteran said over a form. None of them were clean versions of themselves. That was the point. Tobin had not found a perfect father in the wall of Prairie Crown Annex. He had not found a perfect system, a perfect town, or a perfect ending. He had found 6 heartbeats in a cold room. Then he had watched a community decide that truth could cost something and still be worth paying. The smallest puppy released Tobin's shoelace and barked at a falling clump of snow from the roof. Ruth gave the pup one patient look, then turned her amber eyes toward Tobin. The old silos stood against the bright North Dakota sky. The door to the warm room remained open. Sometimes the hardest truth is not the one that exposes a wrong person. It is the one that also asks honest people to face what they allowed, what they feared, and what they must repair. Tobin did not find a perfect father, a perfect town, or a perfect system. He found a mother dog protecting 5 small lives, a community brave enough to stop hiding, and a door that could finally open without shame. May this story remind us that doing right may cost something, but silence often costs more. And by God's grace, even a cold room, an old wound, and an unfinished letter can become the beginning of mercy. If this story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances. May peace find you where the truth is hard, and may hope meet you there.